Hey guys, welcome to David Audio Production. Thank you for taking the time to check out my video. There's an old adage in mixing circles that you can never have too many EQs. It is very true that having a variety of EQs on hand to deal with different problems or add different tonal colorations to certain tracks or to an overall mix is a very good idea. But if you're a beginning mixer who's just now beginning to be ready to move on from your stock EQ, or if you're a veteran mixer who's has a number of EQs on hands already and is looking for something different, it is not always easy to wade through the wide variety of EQs that are available out there to make a well-informed decision on what to spend your money on. In this video, I'm going to try to go through a number of options of different EQs and help you build a thought process to evaluate your needs and choose the proper EQ for what you're looking for, and not waste money on things you may not use or may already have. Before we start wading into all the different options for EQs that are available out there and how to start differentiating between them, let me first stress this one very important fact. Your stock EQ is more than adequate for most of your filtering and EQ needs. The EQ that comes with Reaper is actually an excellent EQ. It has an unlimited number of bands available. It has many different shapes of those bands and offers a wide range of adjustments in both frequency range and bandwidth, and basically can do pretty much anything that you need an EQ to do. The EQ that comes in Studio One is a very good EQ. The Tone Boosters EQ that comes with Mixcraft is a very good EQ. It's very important before you start spending money on EQs to understand how to use your current stock EQ, and also to understand what it's not giving you that you need. If you do not have a really good idea in your head of what you need an EQ to do, sticking with your stock EQ for now is probably the best option. In order to start properly selecting what EQ you need to add to your collection, it's necessary to figure out what it is that you're not getting from what you have already. Your most stock EQs are very capable, but they are missing certain features that you can find in other digital EQs, such as band soloing and dynamic control. If you start seeing the need to use band solo or dynamic control in your mixes, then looking into an upgraded digital EQ is certainly a viable option. Also, if you want something with more color or more saturation or more just analog flavor, whatever that may be to you, you're not going to get that from your stock EQ, and then you're going to need to start looking into other areas to add to your collection. But it's very important before you start spending money on EQs to evaluate what it is you need that EQ to do, and also then to check the features of what you're looking at to make sure that it offers you the options that you're looking for. The first thing a lot of people decide they do is that they want something better than the stock EQ that came with their DAW. And I could certainly understand that, but it's very important that you understand that another digital EQ is not really going to give you more than you already have on hand. Two pretty common digital EQs are the Waves Q10 and the Waves Renaissance EQ. When you look at these, they are somewhat a little more impressive sometimes than your stock EQ, but you have to look at them very carefully to understand that they're not really giving you anything that you don't already have. Both of them have a limited number of curve shapes. They do bell, shelf, high cuts, and low cuts. And sometimes they give you a notch filter. Some stock EQs don't do really heavy notch filtering, but a lot of them do. A notch filter, by the way, is just a very, very sharp cut, which cuts a very narrow frequency band, like I hear on the Q10. Okay. But if all you need is a notch filter, you can usually get close to that with your stock EQ. These are very good EQs. They're solid. And some say that, especially in the case of the Renaissance EQ, it does sound better. It has a better sound than a stock EQ. I'm not going to evaluate that yes or no. I'm basically just going to say that neither one of these are going to give you a lot more than what you already have available in your stock EQ, and probably are not worth spending your money on. A better option for an upgrade to your digital EQ would be something that has band solo. The Infinity EQ from some Slate Digital, the SSL Native XEQ, and the Acon Digital EQ all have band solo available. These are definitely an upgrade from a stock EQ. Most of them are unlimited band. Some have more curve shape to them. They're just a little bit fancier. But the one thing they do all offer you is a band solo function. The SSL has a band solo there. The Slate EQ, the Infinity EQ has a band solo there. And the Acon Digital has a band solo here. And again, all three of these are somewhat of an upgrade from your stock EQ. So if you want to upgrade from your stock EQ, have something like a band solo and maybe a little bit better of an EQ, maybe some more filter shapes or curve shapes. These are all pretty decent choices to make. Probably a better upgrade from your stock EQ would be a dynamic EQ. Of all the dynamic EQs out there, the most popular for professional mix engineers is the FabFilter Pro Q3. This is an amazing EQ. Just as a straight EQ, it's a really solid EQ, and the added dynamic functionality brings it over the top. It is not cheap. This is a very expensive EQ, and it does not go on sale very often. And I don't really recommend you buy this unless you're really, really serious about mixing. And as you can see, like you can disable or enable the dynamic section up here. It has a solo function like some of the other ones. A lot of people say that this is just an amazing sounding EQ. I agree with that. It has a lot of curve options to it. It's just an amazing EQ, probably worth every penny, but really only worth the investment if you're serious about mixing and intend to do it for a very long time. Two other options, more reasonably priced for dynamic EQs, are the F6 from Waves and the Nova EQ from Tokyo Dawn. There is a free version of the Tokyo Dawn Nova EQ. This is called the Gentleman's Edition. This is the one you actually paid for. It adds a couple more bands, gives you a little bit more control inside those bands, and adds some smart ops capability up top if you want for learning and doing a bunch of other things. It's a really, really cool EQ to have. The Waves EQ is pretty similar to it. It's got the same number of bands. It does not have the smart ops. But again, it's another solid EQ option. The major difference between these two is the actual topology of the EQ itself. The F6 as well as the FabFilter EQ are serial EQs in which one band feeds into the next. And so the audio runs through all the bands on the way in and out. The Nova EQ, on the other hand, is a parallel dynamic processor in which each band is on a separate track from the others, and the audio comes in through each band individually and also separated from it so that you're actually affecting part of the input signal but not the whole input signal. A little hard to explain, sometimes a little hard to get your head around, but it does make a difference in the way it works. This is a very clean EQ. This was specifically designed to be a dynamic EQ, as was the Waves X6, but the parallel topography gives it a different function. Not something that you're necessarily going to hear, but it's just the way it processes the sound differently. And that brings us to the world of analog emulating EQs. There are a number of variety of analog emulation EQs, from EQs that don't necessarily emulate a specific piece of hardware to EQs that are emulating a specific outboard EQ to Pultec EQs, which are extremely popular, and we will go into that in a little bit. Also then to EQs that emulate specific consoles like the Neve or the SSL or the API, and a number of other ones like the Abbey Road Red consoles, the Trident, and so forth. The sheer variety of analog EQs that are out there and how to apply them can be a little overwhelming to somebody who's never looked into it, and requires a lot of forethought into what you're looking for and what you want it to do. The first category of analog EQs we're going to look at right now are ones that don't emulate a specific piece of hardware, and there's a number of them out there. Some good examples of that I have on hand are the Boz Digital Labs Hoser EQ, the PSP Precursor 2, the Tone Empire Black Q2, and the Tokyo Dawn Slick EQ. This again is the Gentleman's Edition. There is a free version of this out. This is the paid version. None of these EQs are emulating a specific piece of hardware, but they're emulating like an overall analog feel. They all have some kind of a saturation drive control. They all have some limitation to the frequency range that you can adjust. They all have some limitation to the number of bands that you can add. All four of them are pretty interesting. They are slightly different in flavor, but not different enough for me to say that this one is better than another. They do different things. But none of them are emulating a specific piece of hardware. But they are all interesting choices if you're just looking to add some flavor to a mix and a little bit of saturation and drive. Getting into actual emulations of hardware, probably the most significant and popular one out there is the Pultec EQ. There are a number of different Pultec EQ emulations out there, from Waves with their Puig Tech, from Black Rooster, from Noise Ash with their Rule Tech emulation. There's also one from IK Multimedia. These are all emulating, these are all flat out, straight up Pultec emulations. There are also a couple out there that are emulating hardware that was emulating Pultecs. Most significantly is the Pultec EQ, which is emulating the TubeTech emulation of a piece of hardware. So basically, it's an emulation of a Pultec. And then there is also the Better Maker, which from Plugin Alliance, which is emulating a piece of hardware that is very popular with like mastering engineers. It's based on a Pultec, gives a lot more options and capability to it, and can be a little bit more confusing to use than the basic Pultec. The most popular and best known Pultec emulation is the EQ1A, or basically the 2-band Pultec EQ, which has the low band, high band. It's a very popular EQ. I've gone into it in detail in my free Pultec in another video explaining what Pultecs do. But again, this is the most popular and recognized Pultec emulation out there. There is also the EQ5, which is a mid-band Pultec EQ, and also some of them also include a high cut and a low cut filter section as well. But the mid-range equalizer, the EQ5, is a 3-band EQ with a peaking, a dipping, and a peaking filter at different frequencies. So the lower peak filter runs from 200 to 1000 hertz, and literally just boosts that range. Then the one in the middle is a dipping filter that runs from 200 to 5K, and that reduces the mid-range. And then the other side of the peaking filter runs from 1.5K to 5K, and that again is a boost. That's a very handy thing to use if you're trying to shape the mid-range on a particular item, or if you're having issues controlling mid-range. Something like that comes in really very handy. Another option for Pultec to look at is several manufacturers have them. I have the RuleTech Heritage from Noise Ash. This is a unified plugin which has all 3 Pultec modules built right into it. You can switch each one each one on and off individually, but it has the high cut, low cut filter section, the EQP1A section, and the mid-range equalizer section, all built into one unit. That's a very popular one, and one I would highly recommend if you're first getting into Pultec EQs. There are a number of other interesting hardware unit emulations out there that you can take a look at. One that I like very much is the Siemens EQ. This is the CQ from Sound Toys, and Arturia also has an emulation of this particular unit. This is a 3-band EQ. Again, most of your hardware emulations are going to be limited in bands. This is emulating a piece of hardware from Siemens, from an old piece of hardware from Siemens. Has a lot of interesting color and sound to it. This one, especially the Sound Toys one, Eric Valentine, I see him use these a lot on his channel. He actually has the hardware units themselves, so if he's using this as an emulation of the hardware, you know it's pretty good. Another hardware unit that's popular with a lot of people, of course, is a Baxandall EQ. Baxandall EQs are hi-fi EQs, very similar to what comes on a home stereo. They're shelving EQ, two-band shelving EQs with a high and low. They are selectable for frequency. There's a high-pass and a low-pass filter as well. There's no mid-range control on this, but you can definitely do a lot with your high and low end with a Baxandall style EQ. And this is the Dangerous EQ from Plug-in Alliance. This is a solid Baxandall emulation. The Mog EQ, which is also from Plug-in Alliance, is another popular one. This is a wide range EQ. These are fixed band EQs for sub, I believe that's a 20 hertz. Then they have peaking at 40, 160, 650, 2.5 shelf, and then their air band. The air band is what makes the Mog EQ special. This goes from 2.5 all the way up to 40K, which is above the range of human hearing, but it does have an effect on what you can hear. And you can dial in a lot of top end air into a track if it's missing some, or if you need to add some sparkle to it without getting overly harsh. Another popular one to have, used a lot. Interesting one to get is the Gem EQ495 from Overloud. This is emulating the EQ on a lathe that cuts vinyl records. Adds some interesting color and flavor to it, some interesting band selections. You've got some Q selection, shelving, high pass, low pass filters. A really cool one, gives you a different feel, different sound, works in a lot of different places. Also out there is the Millennia NSEQ2 from Plug-in Alliance and Brainworks. This is emulating a twin topology EQ from Millennia. It does Class A, vacuum tube, or JFET style EQs. There's a lot going on in there. It's a little bit complex. You can do some interesting things with it if you spend some time with it and get to know it. Last on this list is the plus 10 dB equalizer from Boz Digital Labs, and this is emulating an old, I forget what it is, like APR or something EQ like that. 4-band EQ that either does dip or peak at different frequencies. It's a really cool EQ. You can do some interesting things with it. Again, a different flavor EQ that you stick it on a track. It's going to give you a slightly different, EQ curve to it and help you separate things out. All very cool EQs, all good ones to take a look at if you're looking for something different and unique. And that brings us to console EQ emulations. A console EQ emulation is based on just the EQ section of Recording Console. A console channel strip will also include things like compressors, gates, expanders, and all the different sends and returns that you don't need to emulate in a plugin. But these particular EQs are emulating just the EQ section of a Recording Console. Probably the most popular EQ emulation would be the Neve. And there's 3 different families of Neve EQ emulations. The first and most basic one is the 73. And this is also the one that there's the most numerous examples available. This is the Burnley EQ73 from Sonomus. This is the EQ73 from T-Rax. This one is the VEQ3. This is the stereo version from Waves. Then there is also from Waves the Sheps 73, and another one would be the Arturia Pre 73. And the last one I have to show you here is the Need 73 from Noise Ash. These are all basically very similar EQs, and based on the 73 console. These three over here are the most basic of the three, and what you can see with these is they have a high pass filter with settings of 50, 80, 160, or 300 hertz, or you can turn it off. It has a low frequency shelving EQ at 35, 60, 100, 110, or 220 on this particular one. Some others are more limited. On the Sonomus one, it's 35, 60, 110, or 220, as it is on the T-Rax version. That is a low frequency shelving EQ. Then there is a mid-band EQ, which is a peaking EQ for cut or boost, again at fixed frequency points of 360, 700 hertz, 1.6, 3.2, 4.8, or 7.2 kilohertz. And then there is a high shelf fixed at 12K. All of them have the same basic layout of EQ. The differences start coming in with like the Sheps and the Arturia, which are all set up basically the same way, but they're giving you two sets for stereo, so you can adjust the left and right separately, or you can link them together. Another thing that you see all of them have is they have a preamp or a drive control, which emulates the input transformer side of the EQ73 console, and there is also an output trim, either a slider or a knob, available on all of them. The Noise Ash one, the Need 73 console EQ, is slightly different. It gives you a little bit more capability in the fact that they added a second mid-range control with all the same EQ points available, which gives you the option of setting two different mid frequencies with the same plugin. That's a pretty handy thing to have. It also has mid-side mixing, analog on or off, and then their nuance deviation, which emulates two different channels of a board and the slight variations that you get from two different channels, which will help you add some slight variation in color if you're using this instance across a lot of similar sounding tracks. Any one of these is a solid emulation of a Neve 73 console, and will do pretty much the same job for you pretty much across the board. Another Neve console that's very popular is the 81 series. This is the there's less of these available in plug-in form. It's not as popular as the 73. This is the EQ81 from T-Rax and IK Multimedia. This is the EQ4 from Waves. And this is the VEQ, whoops, sorry, didn't mean to close that. This is the Need 81 console, again, from Noise Ash. Differences between these and the 73 is that these add a second mid-range band in a different area of the spectrum. So you have your low shelving you have your low shelf here at different frequencies from the 73. You have a low mid EQ with different frequencies, an upper mid EQ, and then the high range EQ has different selectable frequencies instead of being locked in at just 12K. They also add a low pass filter, and in addition to the standard preamp and everything else. And again, the Noise Ash version has the nuance deviation to change to different frequencies of the console. Also a very popular EQ, gives you a lot more flexibility as far as what you're EQing than the 73. Maybe not as popular as the 73, but also a solid as a rock EQ. Much less common is the 84. The Noise Ash 84 console, and then Overloud has the EQ84. And these are emulating a console that was basically a 73 with two mid-range controls, much like the Need 73 from Noise Ash. It's the same idea, but this also then adds in the high pass and low pass filters, and again, mid-side and so on. Again, interesting. You can get kind of the same thing in the Noise Ash Need 73, but this one adds the low pass filter. Not as popular, again, as the 73 or the 81, but definitely an interesting option to give you something different in the Neve family. Another very popular console EQ that is not very numerous out there is the SSL EQ. I have two versions available for me, is the Waves GEQ and the Sonomus Stone EQ. These are both emulating 4000 series consoles. The Stone EQ, I believe, is emulating the 4000E Brown, and the Waves is the G series Black low frequency. That's a slight variation in the curve shape, not a huge difference. The Stone EQ from Sonomus is just a basic EQ with high low frequency shelves and mid frequencies with sweepable, parametric sweepable and adjustable Q. Whereas the Waves version gives you a little bit more capability. It gives you a high pass filter and the ability to triple the adjustment in the mid frequencies. Again, not the most popular EQ only, way more popular in channel strip form, but they're out there if you're interested in them. The API EQs, much like the Neve EQs, come in three different flavors. The most basic of the three is the 550A. This is the Waves version, and this is the version from IK Multimedia T-Rex. And what you can see on these is the fact that this is a 3-band. The low band on the T-Rex is selectable from shelf to peaking. On the Waves, it's also adjustable from peaking to shelf as well. The mid-range is a peaking only. They are fixed frequency. You cannot go in between the frequencies that it has available. The T-Rex adds an input gain and a preamp knob to give you some of that input, some of that saturation, whereas the Waves only has an output. These are pretty basic EQs. They do sound really good. They're definitely API flavored. The next one from that is the 550B, which again, I have two versions from T-Rex and from Waves. This adds a second mid-band. So you now have your low shelf, or peaking, and then you have your two mid bands and your upper band for mid shelf and peaking. The Waves is switchable for shelf and peaking on the high frequency and low frequency with these switches here. And last from API is the 560, which is a little bit unique. The 560 is a graphic EQ, fixed frequency, 10-band. Again, gives you about 12 dB cut or boost on each band. These are fixed. Again, the T-Rex gives you the input gain and preamp, whereas the Waves gives you only the output gain. There's a number of other interesting console emulations out there. First of all, we have the Red 17 and the Red 37 and 51 from Waves. These are part of their Abbey Road collection, and I believe Waves is the only one out there that does Abbey Road. These are emulations of the old Red consoles from the API, from the EMI studios at Abbey Road, that the Beatles recorded through, which was basically makes them significant. They do have some interesting capabilities built into them. They are both pretty limited as to what you can adjust. The Red 17 as well as the Red 3751 have a high shelf and a low shelf that they call tone high, tone low. These are fixed shelves. They also have a bass lift, which is either a bass boost or a like a high pass filter, not adjustable, and output gain and input gain, output gain. The 17 has 2 different channels built into it, so you can switch left and right to 2 channels. Whereas the 37 and 51 have this function here to go from pop to classic EQ shape, as well as the channel 1 and 2 selector here. You can select between the 37 and the 51 there. They're basically emulating 2 consoles in the one plugin. The switch between the 37 and 51 changes the overall character of the EQ curves. Both of them have the added capability to be stereo, mono, left, right. You can do stereo, double or mid-side processing in them. They also have a drive control and an analog control that adds some analog noise to them. If you're looking for a really old 60s tube console vibe, they'll both give you exactly what you're looking for there. Another popular console is the Trident A range. These are very unusual console emulations. The EQs work in a different way, where you pick your frequency with the knob and then adjust your levels with the slider for cuts or boosts. They are 4-band with a high pass and a low pass. The high pass and low pass are fixed frequencies from 9K, 12K, or 15K on the low pass, and 25 hertz, 50 hertz, or 100 hertz on the high pass. They also have an input gain on the Arturia 1, phase switch on the Arturia, and we could switch the EQ in and out. And there's the output trim. You can do left, right, mid, side stereo on those, on the Arturia version. Whereas the soft tube version is a little less capable, but also operates in much exactly the same way. Another one of my favorites is the Helios console. This is the Kramer HLS from Waves. This is emulating the Helios console that was in Olympic Studios. The Rolling Stones remote also had a Helios console in it. So some of the earlier Led Zeppelin albums that were recorded with the Rolling Stones remote, we were using this console. This one's a little bit unique. It's got switchable line mic input. It's got a preamp control to increase your saturation and input saturation. It's a 10 hertz high shelf cutter boost. The low bend is either a low cut, which is a 3 to 15 dB per octave cut, or it's a low end shelving boost at a couple different frequencies, but it's not both. The mid-range control, is a switchable for either trim or peak at fixed frequencies, controllable with that knob right there. You have your meter selection, original or low noise. If you need noise, I don't like adding noise. Analog shaping and input-output sliders. Again, a really cool emulation of a pretty rare console. The rarest of all of them, though, is the BX2098 EQ. This is emulating the AMEC console that Rupert Neve built after he left Neve and did this console. I don't know how many of these are out there. There's not many. But this is a really excellent EQ, a lot of adjustability in it, high pass, low pass filters. The low frequency can be either a shelf or a peak. It has a glow function that adds some really interesting color to it. You can increase your gain with the plus knobs. It's the same thing on the high frequency. It's either a shelf or a peak. There's a sheen control, and then again, you can increase your gain. The low, mid, and high frequencies are sweepable, and they also have the gain increase, and they have a notch filter as well as adjustable Q. The Brainworks also adds a mono maker, stereo width, and total harmonic distortion control. A really cool emulation of a pretty rare console. Can give you some interesting color options if you're looking to get some added flavors to your mixes. So as you can see from all of that, the variety available to you can be overwhelming and confusing. And if you don't have a really solid idea of what you're looking for before you start going into shopping for these things, you can get overwhelmed really quickly with your choices. So in the interest of that, I'm going to offer up a few suggestions on how to make your decision process work for you and what to look for in planning your first purchases. First and foremost, the console emulations, especially the Neve, the SSL, and the API, I would avoid. Especially with the Neve, the SSL, and the APIs. These are all available in channel strip form with much more expanded capability, and that is a topic I'm going to cover in a future video. But for now, just understand that having these and then also adding a channel strip down the road would make it redundant. So the added capability of a channel strip would be a better option right now. And again, I will cover that in a future video. I would also pretty much avoid the basic digital EQs unless you have a real specific need for one of those to have, especially the band solo function. I would pretty much avoid them because they're not going to give you anything that your stock EQ isn't already getting that you wouldn't get from a dynamic EQ, which is what I would probably recommend as your first real major upgrade for an EQ. Of the three that I showed you before, the Pro Q3 is by far the best available, but it's also extremely expensive, and unless you're very serious about mixing, the investment is probably out of line for a hobbyist or a bedroom type of a producer at this point in time. So that would narrow you down to either the F6 from Waves or the Nova from Tokyo Dawn. And of those two, my choice would be the Nova from Tokyo Dawn. I like the parallel topography over the serial topography myself. I like the fact that this was designed specifically as a dynamic EQ. And the Gentleman's Edition is reasonably priced, can often be found on sale. And as I said, is an excellent all-around Swiss Army knife. Use it everywhere EQ over and above your stock EQ with a lot more capability. I would definitely recommend that over any of the other ones, were it me. If you're new to mixing and you are having problems making things fit together, the EQ Wise Plus is an excellent choice. And as I said, this is one of the very few plugins I paid full price for. And I have used this often. I still turn to this now if I run into situations that I'm having problems with. If you need the added input of the ranges and stuff, I would definitely recommend getting this. Paying full price for it is not out of line. I would definitely say to have that in your arsenal pretty much right away. Once you get past that, you start getting into the world of analog emulations. And again, that can get overwhelming with the number of choices available. For a first analog EQ, I would probably not go to a specific piece of hardware. I would probably go with the Tokyo Dawn Slick EQ. Again, this is the gentleman's version. There is a free version available, but this is way more capable. Of all the ones I mentioned, this gives you the most flexibility as far as curve shape with the American, British, German, Soviet, Japanese curve shapes. That's an amazing EQ. You have the ability to turn your low and high into shelf or peaking. There's a whole section under here that adds a lot more capability to it with high pass filters, low pass filters. There's a tilt function in it, a linear saturation on the output stage. This thing comes with a manual, and thank God it does, because you're really, there's a lot here that you can use. And to me, for a first analog emulation EQ, I would go with this one over and above all the other ones. You can definitely pick a Pultec EQ. It doesn't matter which one you get. Pultecs are pretty much all doing the same thing. All of the other ones that I mentioned in there, like the Siemens CQs and the Baxendals and so forth, they're all very usable, but not necessarily something you would need to buy right away. So were it me, again, just to go through one more time, I would go for a dynamic EQ above your stock EQ. I would use the EQ Wise Plus specifically if you're having trouble making things fit together. And for your first analog emulation, I would go with the Slick EQ, the Gentleman's Edition. It's an amazing EQ and is going to give you a lot and go a long way for you in one simple plugin. So thanks a lot for coming along with the ride with me there, guys. That was a lot more than I initially anticipated when I started recording this video. There is a lot of information out there. There are a lot of choices for you, and being informed is going to make those choices easier to make. So thanks for watching. If you guys are digging what I'm doing on this channel, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe, hit the like button, drop some comments below. Tell me what you guys like to use. Tell me if you have any ideas that I may have missed in this video. Appreciate you all coming along, and we'll catch you in the next one. Take care.